Yeah, so Craig's claiming he's going to be bringing facts to this conversation.
It generally just starts with like emotions, and then I kind of let them coalesce into an opinion. And then eventually I go to see if reality backs up the opinion, and it maybe becomes a fact.
And if it doesn't, we just edit that out.
Or we just tell you, the listener, are stupid,
There you go.
and that it is a fact.
So, a lot of things have happened in the news. Also, it's been a long time since we last recorded.
Gosh, yeah, it's when it was probably like May or June or something. We did like 2 or 3 COVID podcasts. And then I guess COVID just kind of went off in an absolutely different direction than we guessed. It, instead of being like this huge, terrible thing that kind of burnt out fast, it was like a bad thing for a long time.
Was?
Yeah, it's hard to remember that it's going on now that I work from home.
It's far worse now than it ever was.
Yeah, I know. I look at the statistics on Wikipedia once in a while, and yeah, it's like, it's like 1,800 or 2,000 people a day now. But we are into the colder months of the year, so we kind of always expected it would get worse then.
Yeah, I saw people who were like, Joe Biden's been in office for 2 days and already this many people have died. What a terrible president. And it was like, okay.
You've gotta give at least like, I don't know, 2 weeks, probably 3, before you can even start making the claim of being like, these deaths are Joe Biden's fault. You gotta be reasonable, because really the person like has to get infected after Joe Biden assumes office. That's the bare minimum. And if somebody wants to make an argument that, Craig, even that is dumb, then please make the argument. And maybe I would be like, oh yeah, it could be like 2 months, maybe that'd be reasonable. But at the bare minimum, we're talking like 2 to 3 weeks.
I guess Biden could have ordered a bunch of soldiers to go and kill those people first, and then they wouldn't have died of COVID. But that was about the only real flexibility that he had.
He could have just extrajudicially imprisoned them.
Yeah, and then he could have been like, they died of a heart attack while in prison, in police custody.
Oh, wait, but you're assuming they already had COVID. Yeah, okay.
They had to, right?
Yeah.
They had to get affected like 2 weeks ago. And so it's really stupid. They got infected during Trump's administration. And then people are like, but they died during Biden, so it's Biden's fault.
Well, I mean, he didn't hold them down and like jack them full of vaccine and remdesivir or whatever it is. And,
I don't think you could save someone from COVID when they're 2 days from dying.
Yeah, maybe not. Well, he didn't freeze them so that science in the future can cure them.
Got him. What a lazy ass president. He's just signing a bunch of executive orders. And not tweeting every time he's pooping.
But I've thought a bunch about like the COVID podcast we did last year, because I really ought to go back and listen to them, because I remember a couple of the claims we made that like didn't pan out.
It would destroy Africa. It would be really bad in India. I think Japan is getting destroyed. I still think Africa and India are probably like way undercounting. And I think it's going to be, like I said, where it's going to be, so people do sort of like archaeological statistics on it. And they're like, this massive chunk of the population isn't there anymore. But the government can't account for where it went.
I read a really good analysis about Africa and COVID several months ago. And one of the things it pointed out is that it's the youngest continent. The average age in Africa is like 35 for the whole continent. It's unbelievably young. And I mean, essentially, if you're under 55, COVID's almost not going to kill you unless you're like an asthmatic, chain smoking diabetic. The odds of you dying of COVID under 55 are very low. And so for a continent of people whose average age is 35, it could make a lot of sense that COVID never became a huge deal in Africa. Like,
I think there's millions of old people in Africa, and I think they'll just all die from it. Or like, the maximum fraction will die. Also, they have a ton of comorbidities. Because like what you just listed, they are like chain smoking. They have diabetes. They have untreated condition. Because they're like, there's a lot of people who are too rural to really get access to good healthcare. Yeah. But they're not so rural, they're not going to get COVID.
Yeah. But as a fraction of the population, or deaths per 100,000 people, it'll probably still look much better in Africa than it will in Japan.
Yeah.
Japan will just look terrible because their population is so old. Who has a population older than Japan?
I think no one.
Yeah, okay.
I guess Japan has example to use. They have negative population growth. They do a really good job of caring for old people. So and medium-aged people, so they get to be old. So yeah, they have the perfect confluence of circumstances to have a whole bunch of old people who can all get it.
Yeah. Another thing that we guessed in those old podcasts was that the hospital system in the US would become overwhelmed, and that eventually you would start having a bunch of people dying because the hospital system was overwhelmed, and that was taking out basically removing the doctors, and people who would live if they just got a little bit of treatment in a hospital would instead die.
Although we did raise the question of how much does hospital intervention matter? And I still don't know. It's months and months later, and I still don't actually know the answer to how helpful is it to be hospitalized.
That's an incredibly difficult question, because the answer to it itself changed over time as we got better at treating COVID.
Yeah, like we were still caring about ventilators back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you haven't heard anyone talk about ventilators in like 8 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess there's a vaccine now, so we get to find out about that. Oh, I remember another thing. I predicted Tesla would do really badly from it. I think arguably Tesla's probably still doing really badly from it, but oh boy, that stock price is not reflecting it, not one bit.
Yeah. And you have kind of I forget what they call it. There's this really funny term for it. It's like a wealth effect, like a wealth aura effect when the stock market goes up because you have a bunch of money printing going on. And then people are like, hey, now I'm rich. I can afford these luxury goods. And so then they go out and buy things they otherwise wouldn't have bought, even though their income hasn't gone up.
Yeah, that's true. They're still making the same number of dollars.
Yeah.
And then the US is printing a bunch of dollars, and they're like, so I have more money, right?
Yeah. Their purchasing power is going down. Their cash flow in US dollars is the same. But then they're going out and buying additional luxury goods. And on top of that, if it's a car, it's something that has a payment attached to it for a long time.
I'm guessing you don't watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia, do you?
No, I don't.
They had an episode where people running a bar created Patty's Bucks, and they were basically, 1-for-1 gift certificates. And so then they went out and gave them out, and they're like, these are worth $1. And then people would come and redeem them for free beer and stuff. And they're like, so how's this going to work exactly? And they're like, well, we give them the Patty's Bucks and they come in and redeem them. And like, then we get all these people in the door, we get all this business. And they're sort of like, but how would we make more money from that? And they didn't quite close the loop in their minds. And you could sort of see how that can happen to people. It's like, all you've got to do is add one more step or one more step after that. And it becomes too complicated, and people can't focus their attention on it for very long because it's so mind-numbingly boring to care about finance. So it's like, if the US prints more dollars and stock prices go up, the economy's doing good, so I'll buy a boat. And it's like, you skip some steps, and they're like, I already bought it.
Yeah, the inflation and the reduced purchasing power. I feel like with the Patty's Bucks, though, it brings people in the door and they spend the 3 Patty's Bucks for a cheap beer, and then they buy nachos.
That was kind of the theory, but they were giving out way too many, and so people were only spending the Patty's Bucks and then leaving.
Okay, yeah, that would be a problem. It's kind of like if you just printed trillions of Patty Bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Trillions and trillions.
The thing is, the US government is in a different situation, because this would be like if you could print Patty's Bucks and then spend them at other bars. And so then what you do is you print bucks and you'd buy beer to run your own bar. And so as long as you get to use the dollars first, then you can take them out of everyone else's pocket and then spend them on whatever you want, which is like why governments are so addicted to inflating their currencies.
Yeah.
It's an invisible tax on all holders.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Well, there's Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, and there's every asset that is valuated in dollars, but is not a dollar. I mean, there's real estate, collectibles, stocks, bonds. Not that bonds are great nowadays anyway, but there's all kinds of things.
Yeah, anything where you don't have to pay a tax proportional on its value, though, which is harder to avoid. So, like if you have property and you're paying property tax on it and it's based on assessed value, then its assessed value will go up when the dollar gets inflated. It's denominated in dollars, number will get higher.
Yeah, that's a matter of, you broadly have 3 categories there, though. You have the house you live in which case it's like, I've got to live somewhere, so I kind of just have to eat that. And then you have undeveloped investment land, where the property taxes are low, but the value can still rise very quickly, and the additional taxes don't kill you. But, as an investment, it can perform well. And then you have developed investment land that hopefully is producing income in some other way besides just existing as real estate.
So I guess what you really want to do is buy an unimproved property, take out an enormous loan, and then build an improvement on it. And then you get to pay it back with inflated dollars.
Yeah. Or, refinance your mortgage right now.
Yeah.
That's also a pretty good deal.
Yeah. So you basically want to borrow a bunch of present dollars and then you pay them back with future inflated dollars. Yeah. See, it's just one step. It's too many steps. Can't focus.
I mean, you can also, other things you can hold that will help you during periods of inflation. Like you could just buy a business, or you could spend the money to start a business. Because if you need to buy a bunch of inventory, then the value of that inventory will inflate too.
That's true. The other thing you'd arguably want to do is a bunch of currency trading, and you'd want to buy currencies that aren't currently being inflated now.
Which ones would those be? Bitcoin?
Bitcoin's not a currency according to the IRS.
Yeah.
But that's why I was thinking of that, because the IRS does treat Bitcoin as property. And so they tax it with capital gains tax when you try to turn it back into dollars. But they don't treat currency that way. Although I don't actually know how taxation works on currency.
You mean like gains in a Forex account?
Yeah, I don't know how they tax that.
I would bet it's just capital gains.
Well, then why did they consider Bitcoin to be property and tax it as such? If currency and property are the same, they wouldn't have needed to issue that ruling.
Yeah, it looks like from just a quick Google search that it's just capital gains tax on Forex.
Is the difference just that you can spend it on things directly?
Well, I bet there are a whole bunch of other regulations besides taxation that treat currencies and other assets differently.
Okay. Because I was going to say, it seems like you could have like a hypothetical island nation that's like, all right, we're going to print 1 trillion units of currency and no more. And that's it. And then it would be worthwhile to try and buy that currency because it would be taxed differently. And I mean, that's kind of how Bitcoin works, right? There's like 21 million of them and there will be no more, but it's taxed as property instead. And so it seems like someone could do the same thing where they're like, no, this is a currency. Like, yeah, see, it's got some old guy's face on it and everything. It's obviously a currency.
It may also be that the government is a little more hesitant to recognize something as a currency than they are as property, because recognizing something as a currency implies a lot more legitimacy.
Yeah, they don't just give out legitimacy like candy.
And in your case, like a micronation printing $1 trillion of micronation currency, recognizing that as a currency may be construed as recognizing the government of that micronation, which of course is always its own like rat's nest of politics.
Yeah. Sealand could do it.
Yeah. So if you just want some enjoyment and you're not really understanding what we're talking about here, just go search Wikipedia for like micronation, I think they call them. Mm-hmm. And there are several, and all the articles about them are very interesting because it's always some kind of like marginal crackpot guy who's like, I'm going to start my own country. And it's either like in the middle of the English Channel or it's somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Australia. I think there's one. And a couple of them through kind of like lucky stupidity over the decades stumble into being recognized in some quasi-legitimate way by the bigger government. And then they make a claim that they are a legitimate sovereign nation.
Yeah. There's also a Family Guy episode about it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Peter starts his own country. And then eventually they're like, you can't have this country. And he's like, yeah, you and what army? And they're like, the US Army. He's like, that's a pretty good army. And I feel like this actually gets to that question of what is a country? And when you're a kid, people are like, here's the map. That's where the countries are. And you're like, oh, okay. And you don't question that the rules are entirely human made. And effectively, countries don't exist. I mean, they exist as patterns of neurons in people's brains. That's the physical embodiment of them, I guess. But like, they don't really exist. And, there's the joke like, oh, can you see the borders from space when you're in the ISS or whatever? And of course you can't, except in some cases like North and South Korea and stuff. But countries don't really exist. It's this collective story.
They don't derive from some type of principles of science.
Yeah, and so it's this like sort of collective story, and that's the main way that we keep track of it. And so then you have this question of legitimacy, and it's like, how many people can we get to flip the switch in their brain where they're like, yeah, okay, this thing is like a story I now believe in. And other governments recognize that to some extent the value of their story is how much gatekeeping they do for other people being able to claim that they're a government. And like, if everyone can just do it, then that devalues the whole concept of a government and a state and a country. And so you see, I feel like the strongest cases of trying to mess with this are China and other countries like that. Also Russia with Crimea, where you'll have a country and they're just like, yes, this is our territory. And some other countries like, no, it's not. And then you end up with a lot of official things like, well, someone's going to have to draw a line on a map. Where are they going to draw it? Or someone's going to have to hang a flag at this international thing. And then that's where it actually happens. That's where the conflict happens. Like China's like, no, you can't call them Taiwanese Olympians or whatever, or else we're pulling out unilaterally or something like that. And they have to make this stand. And then everyone is like, but why are they doing that? Why are they being so unreasonable? And it's because this like legitimacy concept has a huge amount of value to them.
Yeah. And you only get to really mess it up once.
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons too that I thought crypto forking was so interesting, because it's like, well, what is Bitcoin? And initially it was very easy to answer that question. You could point to it and you could be like, it's this software, it's this blockchain, et cetera. And then people forked it and they're like, this is Bitcoin. And then there's this other group of people who are like, this is Bitcoin. And they're all in a competition to tell the story. My Bitcoin's the legitimate Bitcoin. And it's like, how's this legitimacy thing going to work if nobody has an army backing it? And like everything is voluntary here.
They do have an army. It's the network that solves transactions and says we're bigger.
Yeah, but they don't have any real force. Like China can put someone in prison for questioning the legitimacy of some Chinese claim. That's where we get the like free Tibet thing from. There are people who are in jail or who have been murdered because they disagreed with some key component of an official story and or acted in some way that was out of concert with it. And so they're dead. That's how much it matters. But with Bitcoin, that's unlikely to happen. And so it's very much voluntary. Yeah, you know, there's people with its compute power and everything, but it's like, what happens when it's entirely voluntary? What kind of systems do we see around legitimacy? And I actually expected a bunch more things, like people like hacking websites and being like, no, I have the domain name, like I'm the official Bitcoin and things like that. But that didn't really happen.
I don't know. Pirate Roberts tried to take it to that level in some ways. He wasn't directly like, you should use this fork of Bitcoin, but he was like, you know, I should protect this stuff and I should try to give legitimacy to myself and my efforts in this way.
But I guess going back to the original point about like governments, once I started thinking about like countries aren't exactly real, it made me really think hard about a lot of other things, like the idea that in the event of nuclear war, people want some kind of continuity of US government. And it's like, why? What government would that even be? And they're just like, I don't know. You could, I guess, make the claim that, well, it's a pretty good government, right? It's done some really good stuff for the people under its umbrella when you compare it to other governments. It's done pretty well. And so you could say there's a lot of ideas from that government that we'd like to propagate. Like the idea of having a constitution and putting that above all the people. I think that's pretty good. And actually, I think that's probably like the single best innovation. And yes, I know it goes back to like Magna Carta and stuff, but the idea of having this immutable piece of paper and it's a lot less subject to whim. And so that's great. And in fact, that's a beautiful segue into what we wanted to talk about.
I just wanted to throw in there real quick, if you're interested in these stories about continuity of government, conflicts over that happened all over the place in Europe in World War II, because a bunch of governments had to run away into exile when the Germans invaded everywhere. And so you did have a lot of legitimacy issues, and you famously had Charles de Gaulle like running back to France as soon as the Allies invaded so that he could run into Paris first and be like, I am the government.
Yeah, it would come up with, where do my taxes go?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and who is pointing the guns?
Yeah. It's the guns and basically it's death and taxes. Who gets to cause the death and who's collecting the taxes?
That's how you know who the real government is.
Yeah, you can imagine. Well, I don't know if it happened, but you can imagine like Germany being like, you have to pay taxes. Then they get kicked out of France And then France is like, okay, now you have to pay taxes. And people are like, but I just paid Germany.
Well, and it's funny because that's something I said several years ago. I was talking to someone about Crimea, and and they were like, so then who actually owns Crimea now? And I was like, well, what you do is you walk around until you find someone holding a gun and you ask him where his loyalties lie. And then you like survey the people who are holding guns. And if you survey a bunch and they answer the same, then that's a pretty good indicator of who controls Crimea now.
Yeah. That's more of a Second Amendment type of issue, which gets into a different podcast that I want to do.
Okay. How far in are we? 23 minutes and we're going to touch the issue now.
Preamble.
Are you not entertained?
Well, hopefully all those people are gone by now. They stopped listening. Get out of here.
The 6 who are left, enjoy yourself.
We're down to our fan.
That's fine with me.
Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm going to go in the comments and be like, why don't you guys do another Tesla podcast?
I consider this just chatting with Blake and we happen to record it.
Mm-hmm. That's how we roll.
So did you have any notes for this?
A little bit, yeah. Okay. So what's the point of the First Amendment? Just a reminder for everyone. The First Amendment is the one that guarantees freedom of speech, press, that kind of crap.
Assembly, petition.
Whatever.
All those unimportant extra things after speech. Yeah.
I don't know what freedom of petition means, actually. Assembly is kind of important. Yeah. Assembly is less important now.
I think petition would cover things like if you want a court to rule on something that you think the government is doing that's unjust, you have the right to petition the court.
Like you have the right to ask the question.
Yeah.
And so you could make it illegal to bring a case.
Yeah. And it likely goes back to these specific things that the British government was shitty about in the 1700s. And so it may have turned into something like the Third Amendment, where I don't think there's ever been a Third Amendment Supreme Court case.
Not Supreme Court, but there was a case. It was something like some cops wanted to... There was a guy holed up in a house.
Story.
Right? Oh, okay, go ahead.
I remember it. This was like 5 or 6 years ago.
Craig is a huge Third Amendment advocate. He has like t-shirts and bumper stickers and like everything. You guys don't even know.
We live or die by the Third Amendment. By the way, the Third Amendment is the one that says that the government basically can't force you to quarter soldiers in your house. Which, like, doesn't that really sound weird? It's like, I would not ever expect the government to force me to have a soldier living in my house. But it was a problem in the 1700s. The reason being, the local British governments would go around and take people like, I don't know if they ever did it specifically to these people, but think of like Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, these people who are kind of agitating for revolution at the time. And they would just say, a good way to shut those people down, we'll just put a damn soldier in their house. And we'll say, you have to feed and give this guy a place to live in your house. And that's part of your duty as a British subject. And by the way, it kind of stops your ability to hold these secret meetings that you have where you meet with your conspirators and you agitate against the government. And so that was kind of the genesis of the Third Amendment. So there was this situation 5 or 6 years ago, just some random place in the US. And my recollection of it is that a guy was basically having a standoff with the police and he was holed up in his house. And so the police decided, hey, if we could get into the neighbor's house next door, there's some windows that look at this house where the dude is holed up. And so they essentially forced their way into the neighbor's house, claiming exigency so they wouldn't need a warrant. And then they stayed in there for several hours or something while the standoff was going on. And so the owner of the second house sued the local police and basically said it was a violation of his Third Amendment rights, that he was being forced to quarter those police or give them a place to stay and provide for them while they were forcefully in his house against his will. And I don't remember if it got petitioned all the way to the Supreme Court or if it was one of the appeals courts that basically said, look, this is really not a Third Amendment issue. Like, no, go back and decide it on some other grounds. But I think that's the closest we've gotten to like a Third Amendment case in the Supreme Court ever. It just happens to have been like 6 years ago.
I remember hearing about that and I was like, they're not soldiers. And I feel like that kind of ruins the whole thing. But it was funny that he tried.
I feel like a reasonable Supreme Court justice would say, okay, well, the Constitution says soldiers, but, you know, they could be revenuers, they could be police officers, they could be bureaucrats, they could be any instrument of the government that may come into your home and compromise your right to have privacy in your home. And so really it could be like if the US government had its own Alexa device that listened in your home, like maybe that should qualify.
It's too late for that.
Yeah, I know, but
but I feel like, I mean, so I agree with you from the sort of libertarian perspective of like, let's take away all of the government's rights that they don't explicitly enumerate. But I feel like here it's not explicit enough. And so like from a textualist interpretation, it says soldiers. It doesn't say other things. It would need to say other things. And since it doesn't, yeah, I feel like my argument would be like, I agree with you that it should work that way, but the Constitution should be amended to make it work that way.
Yeah, so I go for more of an originalist interpretation on the Constitution than textualist.
And that's why you're a shithead.
That's why I'm the worst person ever.
Basically. It's got to be textualist. But it's a soldier.
There's Hitler, there's literally Hitler, and then there's Craig.
Who's double Hitler.
Okay, so we were trying to eventually get to the First Amendment here.
Yeah, so what's the point of it, Craig?
Oh, yeah, it's to make sure that you'll be able to spread ideas that are potentially harmful to the government or ideas that are uncomfortable to people, that your thoughts and your ability to communicate and basically spread ideas is the way that I the part that I focus on more than just like I get to go, you know, tell jokes at a comedy club. It's like, well, yeah, it protects that, but you're not doing so much like important idea spreading. Not when you want to go talk about ideas like, should we get rid of income tax? You know, it's more like that.
The other important part is if you want to say something bad about the individuals in the governments, well, so then in my notes, I was like, how does this fail in other countries? And so I feel like one of the things is in some countries, it's sort of illegal to gossip about the people in the government.
Yeah, like the king of Thailand, I believe. It's one you don't want to mess around with. That's something that I felt really good about, like the whole time Trump was president. I was like, isn't it great that like people literally get on Twitter and they go to Trump's like tweet hole and they're like, fuck you, Trump. I fucking hate you. And it's like, they can just do that. You know, that's really nice. Like whether you agree with the specific sentiment or not, like it's really nice that we live in a place and a time where you can do that.
Or you can have like a nationally syndicated show and then your opening monologue is, I'm going to make fun of the president for a long time.
Yeah. I think people kind of take that for granted. And if you've not looked at the history of maybe where the Constitution came from and why it looks the way it does, then like you might not completely appreciate what that means to be able to do that.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think you could look at another country and be like, oh, you know, like Thailand, like, oh, you're not allowed to make fun of the king there. So, you know, you can't have your late night show and you just like make fun of the king. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, how bad is that? But the problem is then you get to play this. Well, we'll probably go into it in a Second Amendment podcast, but like the game that ATF gets to play with people over firearms regulation, where you're like, well, this regulation isn't exactly clear. And they're like, well, why don't you just test it? And if you guess wrong, you'll go to jail for a felony. And so, and that's what people call like the chilling effect. And so in Thailand, it's like, is this making fun of the king? You can be like, I saw the king trip over something today. And it's like, is that making fun of him? And they're like, I don't know. Let's find out if you go to jail. And so then there's this huge gray area of stuff that you dare not tread into because then you just might go to prison or get fined. I don't know if you can get both punishments, but that really sucks too. Like if it was very clearly delineated what you could say, which I'm guessing it never is, then it wouldn't be as bad, but instead it's extra bad because usually the test is whether you end up in jail or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, just to stay on the safe side, I won't talk about it at all. And then it makes it really hard to ever improve the government. That would be my argument.
Yeah, it just has a general chilling effect all around.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is because of deplatforming. So we've entered an interesting era, or maybe we were in it for a long time, where now corporations are regulating the government.
Yeah, and not just through the traditional regulatory capture type of schemes.
They are now banning government officials, which is, I mean, we've been in that situation for a long time, actually. And it's happened, I think, for a long time. I didn't actually look up the history, but I bet if we go try to find, like, what's the first government official that Facebook took any kind of action on, it probably is a long time ago. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like before 2010 even, or the first one Google took an action on or something like that. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I should have researched that.
Yeah, you know, one that I would look for if you were just like, how far back should I look? The guy who yelled "You lie" at Obama during the State of the Union address. I don't remember what year that was. Let me go look that up. Do you remember this, Blake?
Yes, but not what happened. I remember the "You lie." It was an interesting political move. I wonder how planned it was.
Oh, sorry. It was not during a State of the Union address. September 9th, 2009, during a joint address to Congress by President Barack Obama, nationally televised, Joe Wilson shouted, "You lie." And I remember, like, it was just like, what? And not like the accusation that Obama would lie, but the guy just like shouting out in front of Congress like that while everyone's in there and the president is talking, you know?
I just remember thinking like, oh no, are they just all going to be this now? Because if this works, people are going to be like, oh, that's such a good move. And like, you know how the State of the Union address has gradually gone from like an address to
pep rally
applause punctuated by little snippets of speech. And I was like, is it just going to be a cacophony of legislators yelling at the president and they'll be, like all stand up at once and say stuff?
Now, seriously, during a State of the Union address, nothing useful gets accomplished. Okay. And so if it was more like a Jerry Springer atmosphere, wouldn't it be better? It could be like those old videos. I don't know if they still do it there, but the old videos of South Korean parliament where they would start fistfights.
That happens in a lot of governments.
I wonder if that was just kind of a transitory thing like 20 years ago, or maybe it's just like a long-term deal. But, you know, if
I know where that would go, though. Like now we've had Nancy Pelosi saying that she's going to try and punish people for not wearing a mask in Congress. So, which I didn't know she could do, but okay. So then you would have these points of order, like if congressmen attack other congressmen, then they get punished by this much. Then you'd have guys taking a fall like they're playing soccer.
Oh my God, you'd have enforcers like in hockey?
I think it'd be more like soccer where like, you know, Europeans think soccer is just like the coolest sport, but it's played by the wimpiest guys to ever live. Like if a piece of paper lands on them, they're like, oh, I'm knocked out. That's what all our politicians would be doing. They'd all have to wear pads like on their back and stuff so that when they took a fall on purpose, they didn't actually get injured because they're frail old men. They'd be like, he hit me.
Not to put down European soccer too much, though it deserves it, but the exact same thing happens in American basketball. They just fall over at nothing.
American basketball players practice falling over backwards before the game starts. Like they'll like sprawl over backwards a couple of times to like warm up for getting fouled. I assume European soccer players just practice it all the time.
No, but I would imagine like hockey enforcers would become a thing. Like you would work really hard to get some guy elected to Congress who was just a brawler. And then he would just be like, well, if you're going to go after that congressman who doesn't really deserve it and is old and frail and 90 years old, then you're going to have to fight the enforcer later.
Every state has one representative, and he's like this huge guy, 6'6", 300 pounds, made entirely Muslim.
Missing a bunch of teeth.
Yeah. They're like, what party are you? And he's like, the tough party. And they're like, how do you feel about the issues? And he's like, me never vote. Me only punch. And you're like, yeah, okay, I could get behind this guy. He always abstains.
Someone just comes over and votes for him at his table every time.
Yeah, there you go. That would work. Mongo vote straight ticket. But yeah, so Anyway, I was really worried that the you lie thing would turn into this bunch of calculated interruptions whenever the president's speaking in front of Congress. And I was like, oh no, I agree with you. It's not like anything was getting done before, but I wasn't looking forward to, I guess, having a whole news cycle. Here's all the dramatic interruptions that occurred, and let's analyze them all. I'm glad it didn't happen. I'm glad it didn't work very well.
Okay, but back on the topic, that would be my guess of like the first time maybe tech companies would have gone and been like, we'll censor somebody over this thing. But I suspect that was like way too early. That I think that said it was 2009, which seems like such a quaint old time now.
I think the first case would be someone like starting a civil war in a country or something. Like a good example, well, actually it's not, it's like the opposite of censorship. Facebook is famously really proud of Arab Spring. You know, yeah. They're like, oh boy, we sure caused a bunch of revolutions and government overthrows and all this violent unrest. And they're like, look at us. We're a force for good, causing violent unrest.
And help establish modern day slave markets that hadn't existed before. We've done really good.
And then a bunch of people go in the Capitol in the US and they're like, whoa, we don't like violent unrest. Oh my gosh, we've always stood against it. Don't be doing that. And not saying I super support the people storming the Capitol, but Facebook really, I guess you could say they're consistent in that they don't mind violent unrest in all foreign countries.
Yeah.
And we never knew what their US policy was. And in their defense, it is the country that they're headquartered in. So you can imagine them treating it differently. And I feel like they did.
They're headquartered on the opposite side, though. I wonder what would happen if up in Montreal there was some unrest. Or, I don't know, somewhere closer to Facebook headquarters, but than DC is.
Vancouver, I think.
All those Canadian places, I don't know.
I think Vancouver is the like southwest city, and it's pretty close to Seattle.
Okay.
So yeah, Montreal's pretty far.
I just call all of Canada occupied North America.
Montreal, yeah. But yeah, I did really enjoy what I felt like was kind of some hypocrisy from Facebook there. But I can't actually think of people that they've banned because they did kind of support Arab Spring. And I don't know that they banned the people on the other side of it. So they were sort of implicitly like, well, whoever's overthrowing the government is good, right? And they kind of supported the revolutionaries there. But I don't think they banned the government people either. They were like, yeah, you know, they can keep posting, try and defend themselves on Facebook. We'll see how well it works.
I mean, does Bashar al-Assad still have an active Twitter account?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't remember which of those people died. Like, Gaddafi died, right?
Gaddafi was killed.
Al-Assad, I thought...
Al-Assad's still alive. He won his civil war, essentially. I mean, it's been going on like 8 years now, and he's still in power, which kind of means he won. But yeah, for a long time, you know, ISIS and all the other terror groups had active Twitter accounts, and you would just always see them post their propaganda videos and things up there.
Yeah, we don't mind ISIS, but we'll ban Trump. Yeah, so I guess I should just ask, how do you feel about tech companies banning Trump?
It seems very... Well, they kept him around when he was good for advertising and ratings. And then...
Oh my God, they sure did. I bet... I can't imagine the level of dissonance at Twitter in particular. So also for people who don't... Probably most of our listeners, since they, to some extent, they like... accreted because of who we are and like the communities we participate in. I think our listeners are probably mostly pretty strongly aligned with us, you know, and kind of in similar circles. But for people who are maybe more outside those circles, like Twitter, Facebook, Google, those companies are so incredibly liberal. It's hard to describe how liberal they are. They'll like debate with each other about how liberal they should be. Who's the liberalist? How could we be more liberal? They're really, really far left. And so the level of like dissonance and discomfort at having Trump on the platform for 4 years at Twitter must have been incredible. I haven't asked anyone at Twitter who directly knows about it, but like, I think I've mentioned this before, but at Google, when Trump got elected, it was like everyone's mom died. Some people just didn't come into work the next day. They were just so sad. And I was arguing with people. They were like, oh, he's definitely going to cause a nuclear war immediately when he becomes president. Which now I won that bet. He did not cause nuclear war, not remotely immediately when he became president. I was just like, okay, he's only going to be finitely bad. which is great too. I feel like I kind of lost that bet too. I was like, oh, he'll only be finitely bad. How much damage can he possibly do? And then we get things like the Hallmark Channel supports the peaceful transition of power within the US. And it's like, oh God. And we only had so many hundreds of thousands die of the pandemic. And it's like, what pandemic? Oh, but still, he's out of office now. The country's not gone. So, hey. But anyway, those companies are really liberal. And so I imagine Twitter was like, we just don't know how to quit you, Trump. Every time you tweet, it brings people to our platform. But also, we fucking hate you and everything you stand for. And all of us voted against you, and we're all going to vote against you again. And we're all probably conspiring how we can get you out of office, but make it not look like we did anything. But God, we hate you. And then finally, they're like, this is a good enough excuse. Let's ban him.
It's only 8 days before the transition of power. Let's just go ahead and do it. We'll deal with the loss of clicks.
Yeah, and I also feel like another factor there is you can imagine all the tech companies sort of virtually looking at each other, and they're like, is it time? Are you going to do it? And they're like, yeah. And then they all ban him at the same time. And because they all act as a coalition, they're like, all right, he's not just going to take all his shit and move it over to Facebook. Because Facebook's like, yeah, we're going to ban him too. And so they're all like, okay, if we all agree to not be the defectors in this situation, well, I'll just lose out on his ad revenue at the same time. It'll be fine.
At least Reddit had the guts to take that giant hit a couple years ago when they banned the Donald subreddit.
That wasn't a Trump mouthpiece, though. I'm pretty sure that Trump would sit down to poop, and then he'd just be like, fuck this media organization in particular. Fake news.
tweet.
Dumbass. It's the liberals, or I don't know, whatever. And then he'd, wipe and finish up, and then he'd go back to whatever it is that he does. I don't know, golf or something. But I'm pretty sure a lot of those were poop tweets. And Reddit didn't have poop posts from Trump. He wasn't posting poop videos on YouTube. It was Twitter.
It wasn't him directly, but it was a giant congregating point for supporters. And Reddit was pulling a huge amount of their ad revenue from that one single subreddit. Because there were people who had advertiser accounts with Reddit, and you could go on to your advertiser account and you could type in the name of a subreddit and you could see like what the traffic was and what the statistics were for that. And people posted that up. And then that got out to the wider internet several times. And so I saw that on other websites, and it was like Reddit was getting like 30% of all their revenue from clicks on the Donald.
Okay. I would guess what really did it for Reddit, though, was the relative awfulness of the people there.
It's weird how bad Reddit is.
I guess it's misinterpreted what I said. I meant the people on the Donald, not just Reddit in general.
I would imagine both. It's like Reddit is this giant magnet for scum. It's just like every subreddit you get into. Like literally, I've started following this guy on YouTube. It's a channel called Alpha Investments, and he's just this like business guy who's really good with like, economics and finance, but he also like collects and invests in Magic the Gathering cards, which is like this really great intersection for me. And like he does nothing but talk down about Reddit. And he always talks about him like all those PhDs over on Reddit and everything. And it's like even in a community of like Magic the Gathering on Reddit, or there's a subreddit called something like Magic the Gathering Finance. Even there, like everybody's just an uncontrollable shithead.
What even is that? What's Magic the Gathering Finance? They're like, how much of my portfolio should I put into Black Lotuses?
It's just discussions of like card values and stuff, I guess. I don't know. But how is it that a community on Reddit that is focused around Magic the Gathering and finance is full of shitheads? Well,
if you claim it is, that makes it really easy.
Okay.
Like the easiest explanation is he's wrong, right? That's a really easy explanation. Assuming he's right, though, I would say, do you feel like you understand how Reddit works?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like the easiest way to explain it is the moderators suck. That's a simple explanation basically every time.
Yeah.
I'm in a bunch of Reddit.
They're unprofessional volunteers. And that's like a terrible formula.
Yeah, but like I'm in a bunch of Reddits. wildly varying in quality. Yeah, like there's one called Bad Economics, and I feel like that one's moderated really well. And it's basically like, hey, let's just make fun of other people who have really bad ideas about economics. And I feel like I basically 100% agree with them. They enforce that posts there have to have an explanation for why this thing is bad economics, and they will just like completely delete the post if it doesn't. And so you have to explain it. And people will be like, this person's advocating for a $30 minimum wage. And then someone will explain, here's why that's bad economics. And then they post it. And then I feel like most of the commenters in there are like, yeah, this is really stupid. And in a way that other people don't understand. And so like that one's, it's really good. And I guess also looking through my list of subreddits, I'm not really a member of ones that have bad moderation. I guess Bitcoin would be a good example of one that I'm not a member of because the moderation's terrible there. There's this moderator named Thamos, and he's principled. He basically deletes and bans people who say anything bad about Bitcoin and who question in any way the legitimacy of Bitcoin Core, essentially. So if they talk about Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Satoshi's vision, hey, maybe we should fork Bitcoin. Bitcoin has core flaws in it, like, hey, the block sizes are too small or anything like that. He like mercilessly deletes and bans those posts. It's like that dude must own 10,000 Bitcoins, and he's deathly afraid that if anyone ever questions the legitimacy of Bitcoin, that his value will go down or something like that. And I feel like the guy's kind of an asshole for doing that. Like, I think, sure, maybe exerting all that control is going to be beneficial for him in the long run, but it feels like Bitcoin is not so weak that if someone talks about different size blocks that it's going to fail. And I think he's acting like it's this like, it's both this fragile little flower, but also it seems like maybe the vast majority of his net worth is in it. And it's like, it probably shouldn't be both things. If someone can whisper the wrong word and you lose $1 million, like maybe you should divest yourself in the first place instead of trying to regulate the subreddit in order to prop up the value. But anyway, kind of don't like that guy. Hey, at least he's principled and he's open about it. But yeah. So anyway, for MTG Finance or whatever it is, I would say probably bad moderation.
Okay. It's just been my experience in most subreddits. As you were saying that, I thought of a couple where it's good. There's one that's like gun deals, and it's just people link up deals to like cheap ammunition or cheap guns or stuff like that.
Does that still exist? Because I thought that was banned on Reddit.
No, it actually still exists. Yeah, of course, I'm going to hell gets banned, but gun deals is still there. They have really good moderation. They'll be like, this has to actually be a deal. You can't shill. And, they have several other rules. Like, it has to be more than quantity one available. So, yeah, I can come up with examples of good ones, but it just feels like Reddit, for the most part, is just trash.
Going back a little bit, I feel like the Donald people were really bad. They were like the deplorables that Hillary was talking about. And I bet they did things like send death threats to the actual people running Reddit. And they were like, okay, we've had enough of this. And I think that's probably why they got rid of it.
Yeah, but like I said, at least Reddit had the guts to do it and take the huge hit on revenue early on.
I'm more arguing that I think they didn't have the guts. I think the guts would have been leaving it there.
I don't know. Okay. How did we get this far off topic?
I blame you. I think they did the cowardly thing.
Okay.
And for these other companies, it took them longer to do the cowardly thing. One of the things I wanted to point out is a lot of people will talk about this stuff, like deplatforming and tech companies, as a free speech issue. And I'm sure you're like, it's not free speech, right? I don't feel like it's free speech.
It's a problematic issue. Are you saying that you don't feel like it's free speech because it's just okay to do it?
No, because it's a private company.
Okay. Yeah, so it's okay for them to do it to you.
Yeah, so like people they'll get banned from Twitter and they're like, they're trampling my free speech rights. And it's like, I mean, I guess you can just be like, it's a free country, I can do whatever I want, which is definitely not written down in the Constitution. But also, if you want to get into the legality of it, the First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so when someone bans you off of Twitter, I would like you to point out the law that Congress passed that abridged your freedom of speech, because you're not going to find it. And so I feel like we need a better term. I feel like we need a better term for that, but I don't know that anyone's ever going to use it. But like the way I've been thinking of it is speech amplification. Like what a tech company does is they provide speech amplification, because you can still go and talk to people. You could post a flyer somewhere and then be like, hey, I'm going to give a conference. And then you can be like, Trump sucks, you know, and tell everybody there, all 1,000 people who show up or whatever. And that's still fine. And Congress can't tell you not to do that, but they can't really control what private companies do. And so functionally what you're doing is you're saying, hey, Twitter, Trump sucks. Please tell everyone else. And then Twitter, mostly through an automated process, is like, yeah, okay. And then they deliver Trump sucks to everyone's inbox. But sometimes they're like, we would rather not. And so they decline. And in this case, you're asking Twitter to speak on your behalf. And so Twitter's like, I don't want to say that. And that's within their First Amendment rights. Like, no one should be able to compel them to say it. That's essentially the same issue. So anyway, speech amplification.
Yeah, it's a very problematic issue, because essentially the commons through which we communicate have changed to these platforms. And then these platforms are now, they're not reliable. And even if you think, well, my speech is popular, your speech will not always be popular.
We know that with like fungineering. Like one of the things I see coming is, partly due to the extreme leftist leaning of most tech companies, they really don't like guns. And so I think gradually it's going to get harder and harder to speak about guns using the current existing tech platforms. And we're seeing early inroads towards that, but I think it's going to get harder and harder, because they are very terrified of guns to a pathological degree. So like that's an example where you could do something that's really popular. Like you have a YouTube channel and you're like, hey, I'm going to shoot a bunch of tannerite and blow it up. And everyone's like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, go YouTube.
Why does he have that accent?
You mean, today I'm going to shoot a bunch of tannerite and we're going to blow some shit up. That's more like it, right? I think this car is going to have very bad day.
We're in this difficult position, right? Because I mean, I know you and I agree on a lot of things politically. I feel like we overlap probably like 80% or something, maybe more than that. And so both of us really do believe like libertarianism is the right way. You know, if you mostly leave people alone and you follow the golden rule and you treat people the way you'd like to be treated, then like the world would just be nicer, and people would be free to just go and create value and make the world better. And economics would all work better, and everybody would be wealthier and have a happier life, you know. And it kind of feels like, oh, that's kind of the obvious answer to Blake and to me. And you end up with this problem where, and I mentioned it in your Discord channel a few weeks ago, that kind of like retarded libertarian idea is perfectly evolved to be destroyed by these tech companies. And it's like, well, now we have this, because at the core of it, it's like we should leave people alone and we should be nice and we should not violate their rights and we should not do bad things to them that we wouldn't want done to us. But then you're facing these tech companies that are just like, you know, we'll just silence anyone, not on any objective grounds, but just because we don't like you. We'll let other people who call for violence stay on our platforms. But if we say you called for violence, then you're gone.
Yeah, I think that part seems fine.
Right. That's the problem, is that you're going to get eaten alive by it because you think that seems fine. But here we are, where even fungineering will one day be deplatformed because we talk too much about guns and we like guns. And oh my God, it's fun to go to the range and shoot dirt. But, you know, and one day, like, that'll be enough. And the thing is, like, this is a persistent record that'll be around forever. And they'll just have an AI that goes back and listens through it. And it's like, oh, they talked positively about guns. They're now banned.
Mm-hmm. I'll get to click on the appeal button and then they'll be like, your appeal was rejected.
Right.
1 second later. And they'll be like, yeah, it was totally human reviewed. And I'll be like, oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And so this political philosophy that you and I have, well, we believe it to be the right philosophy to have, it's one that is destined to lose in this fight.
Okay, so I remember you saying that. This was in reference to a video that Carl's last name starts with a K, made on InRange TV, which is also totally going to get deplatformed from YouTube at some point because he likes guns. And he was basically saying that people are like, these platforms are exercising their own First Amendment rights. And from a libertarian viewpoint, they're not really doing anything wrong. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, just go and try and make your own platform. And he's like, first, to make your own platform, you need to be a bank. And then he enumerates a whole bunch of steps. And so, yeah, I wanted to address that. So first off, when he talks about being on a platform and sort of free speech, he's conflating a whole bunch of things. He thinks that in order to speak, you also need to be able to take payment. That's not true. If I go out and speak in a town square, I don't need to be able to take payment to speak. And so when he says, oh, first be a bank, then be a credit card processor so you can take payment, that's because he's implicitly saying, not only should I be able to speak on YouTube, but I should be able to get paid for it. And it's like, that's not in the Constitution.
No. He's saying if you want to be able to speak in a way that's relevant in the 21st century, you need to be online. And in order to be online, you need to be able to have business relationships, which requires banking and payment transactions. And so all three of those things, and online is in fact its own like basket of things you have to accomplish. But being online and paying for things and doing transactions, those are all weak points that have been attacked here with deplatforming. So his point is, if you want to have relevant speech in the 21st century, you have to create your own secure network of these things on your own. Because otherwise, you can just lose any one of those links at any time, and then you're done.
Yeah, but not a whole lot of this deplatforming has happened through Visa and MasterCard blocking payment rails or through banks blocking banking.
Yeah, but that was like the original avenue with Operation Choke Point like 8 or 10 years ago. It was, let's go after these people through banks because the government at the time was doing it. And they were like, we don't like all these particular industries. And so we'll just put pressure on the banks that we regulate so heavily to restrict their relationships with those companies.
Yeah, but then that got shut down and they had to undo a bunch of it. Yeah. So like, you can always make the argument like the government did this like unconstitutional thing, therefore something, but eventually it was deemed unconstitutional and they had to walk it back. And it's like the government.
Yeah, but my point is it works. My point is that it works. And now it's being done by businesses. Now it's Visa and MasterCard doing it.
Well, we know that works. Like we know that the government can always suppress speech by coming and just fucking killing you, right?
Yeah.
But then the government eventually tells itself, don't do that. Maybe you're still dead. But like, there's not really a good process to stop that. There's not a process to reach back in time and fix constitutional issues.
My point is that this is an attack vector against people's speech. Because if you want to have relevant speech, you have to be online. You can go to the town square and no one's going to show up because everybody's on their phone.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was Carl's point, is that you do need to then secure your ability to do all those things. You need to have bandwidth that's secure, that can't be deplatformed.
Yeah, that was another one. He claimed that you needed some kind of like DDoS protection, like Cloudflare or something. And I feel like the First Amendment argument there would be the government being required to guard you if you're going to go speak unpopularly in the town square. Like you go into the town square and you're like, hey, we should all overthrow the current government. And everyone's like, but we love it. And we're going to start throwing rocks at you. And then you're like, but the government didn't send a bunch of cops to protect me from all of these rocks. And it's like, they're not obligated to. And the First Amendment doesn't protect you from that. And if someone wants to attack you on the internet, you could argue it's a free speech issue, but it's really not.
Carl prefaced this entire argument with the statement that people claiming, well, just go make your own company that does this is ridiculous. And then he said, here's why it's ridiculous. I will enumerate. And he said, because in order to do this and make yourself immune from deplatforming, you have to have banking and transactions and bandwidth and DNS and all these things. Mm-hmm. He wasn't saying that the government's required to provide these things for you. He was saying this lazy libertarian argument that, well, just go make your own YouTube and then you can just say whatever you want.
The thing is, you can just do that. Really,
how's that worked out for Parler?
Well, so if you're a big dumbass, like the guys running Parler, or multiple dumbasses, and you're like, I'm going to set up all my infra to have a ton of single points of failure, even though I'm specifically doing this because other people have gotten deplatformed by tech companies. So I'm going to start my own company where I have all these single points of failure where other companies can block me. And you're like, there, I've solved the problem once and for all. And it's like, you're a colossal idiot if you do that. They had a ton of points of failure. They had AWS. They had, I don't think it happened to them, but their registrar could have kicked them off. I know it happened to AR15.com, like GoDaddy kicked them off. They had app distribution through Google and Apple, who could just kick them off. I don't know how they were taking payments, if at all, but probably Visa and MasterCard could block them. PayPal could block them. Their bank could stop doing business with them. Parler wasn't, oh no, we got blocked. And then our second, third, fourth ways of dealing with this also got blocked. Instead, they were just like, well, shit, there goes plan A. And that's the only plan we ever had. We sure tried. If getting deplatformed is a concern of yours, you have to treat it like it's a concern instead of the goal is to just build the website out. That's it. And they didn't do anything to insulate themselves from this. It was like the opposite of the prepper mentality. They never, ever thought about what could go wrong.
And so then what could they have done that would not eventually lead them to the thought process that Carl has gone down?
You could buy a server and host it in Russia or China in a data center there. And basically your weak point is the registrar. So you find a registrar that doesn't seem to care particularly about American opinions. You register your domain there and then take payments through Bitcoin. That's another one that happened to Gab. Gab tried to take payments through Bitcoin, but they used Coinbase and someone else, Square, as processors for Bitcoin. And then Coinbase and Square both dropped them, which is great because it's like, oh yeah, Bitcoin lets you like do payments no matter what. And it's like, but what if people want convenient payments? And it's like, oh yeah, shit, like you have to have a private wallet. But the thing is, you could still have a private wallet. You could still take Bitcoin payments. I think they just kind of didn't want to. But what Carl was really saying is, hey, you can't just start up another website, except that that is exactly what people did in the 90s. The first websites created themselves. Like it's not like every website has to come from another website. You don't need YouTube's blessing to make another YouTube. You just make another YouTube. And I say just, that's not really accurate. It's hard, but also someone created YouTube in the first place. And so if you really think the demand is there, you can in fact build another website.
You can, but then if you ultimately want to protect yourself against all these vectors of deplatforming, you have to go much further.
Yeah, it becomes very hard. And if you have unpopular enough speech, it gets really, really hard. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible.
Okay, that was going to be my question. Do you actually think it's possible?
Yeah, it's actually possible. As an example, there exists, the other thing is you'll get pushed ever more underground, which is something that I think we've always seen. Even a long time ago, people would be like, oh, have you seen my zine? It's like this Xeroxed thing. And it would be like a 20-page Xerox magazine or whatever that promoted like socialist overthrow of the US government or something. And like there were people who were trying to speak, but their stuff was forced underground. And it was like they would have to pass it hand to hand or like through word of mouth, because no common platform would carry their speech. And so there exist things like Freenet and I2P and stuff like that, where if you're willing to go sufficiently underground, you can still distribute stuff. And another way of looking at it is what happens to absolutely banned speech? Like a good example would be child porn. So child porn's been deplatformed pretty fucking hard, right? But is it gone? And so like I would ask Carl that. It's like, so can you just get deplatformed completely off the internet? And he'd probably be like, yeah. And then I'd be like, what about criminal speech? Like how to make explosives, or hey guys, you want to buy some drugs or something like that. Is that speech gone? No, it's not. It's just pushed far enough underground. And so it is possible. The speech never goes away. It's almost impossible to stop it. You can't stop the signal from getting out, but it gets pushed really underground.
And so at that point, it's like if Craig decides tonight he wants to go buy some AK-47s and RPGs off the internet, how much work does Craig have to do? Right? Is it even feasible that I would be able to do it?
Well, for AK-47s, I think, it's actually really easy. For RPGs, it's kind of difficult. But I think you could pretty easily, well, Wait, do you want to do it illegally?
Yeah.
If you want to do it legally, I think you could just get an RPG, right? You wouldn't be able to get ammo for it.
There are legal avenues. If you are wealthy enough in the United States, you can obtain RPG launchers with ammunition and you can go shoot them for fun. Yes.
Yeah. So your path would be become an FFL, get a launcher, get rockets, right?
But essentially, it requires a lot of money. You have unlimited gun rights in the US if you have a ton of money.
Yeah.
But
so if you want to do it cheaper and more illegal.
Yeah, I don't. So I would have to go the illegal route. And so all of this ability to buy RPG launchers, which has essentially been deplatformed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you make the claim, and I say, yeah, I agree. The ability to buy them over the internet probably still exists, almost certainly. And so the question is, how difficult does it become?
For AKs, I think it's pretty easy. But maybe AKs aren't an interesting problem. Maybe a better one would be like, I want to buy grenades. How about just that?
That's probably actually easier because I suspect they can walk away from military bases rarely.
Yeah, or what if you want to buy Mexican grenades?
Yeah, okay, there's tons of grenades floating around Mexico.
Yeah, I bet all you have to do is walk the chain of, this is the guy I know who seems to know the most about drugs from Mexico. And then you're like, you ask him who seems to know the most about drugs from Mexico and or grenades. And then you keep following that chain and you either run into the FBI or someone who murders you or someone who will sell you grenades.
Okay, now imagine you're going through that same process, but your goal is not to obtain grenades from the cartel. It's to watch Carl Casarda's new Old West vignette about the shootout at the OK Corral. But Carl has been ultimately deplatformed because he has forbidden opinions on other subjects.
I think I walk up the chain of who knows Carl, and then I drive over to his house and I watch it on his laptop sitting next to him.
So you just drive over. I mean, you've seen this guy. He lives in the middle of the desert in Arizona.
He lives on a bench, right?
Yeah, it's that really nice table that looks like really shitty, but it's actually like really neat. I like it. But
yeah, sorry, he lives at a picnic table in Arizona.
Yeah. So is it practical for you to then watch his video?
Yeah, I just drive over there and I watch it with him on his laptop.
You see the problem here? You have no ability to reasonably consume his video now. I don't claim to know what the answer is here, but I disagree with you that this is not a problem. It definitely is a problem because if you want to see his documentary about the Black Hand mob in New Orleans, you now have to go find Carl in the desert in Arizona.
Well, so I would disagree. I don't think it's not a problem. I'm just saying I think his argument is invalid. It's not impossible to make another website. You have to pay the price. And you pay this tax based on how unpopular and or criminal your speech is. And if it's unpopular, the tax gets higher. If it's criminal, the tax gets higher. If it's both, like child porn is a good example, then the tax is even higher. It's the sum of the two taxes. Like some things are unpopular or they're popular and illegal, like getting drugs. And so then you could see the Silk Road and like there were a bunch of people kind of working together and they're like, yeah, we all want to get illegal drugs. We all want to facilitate this. But then for something really unpopular, there's a bunch of people who are like 4chan will be like, we want to hack this illegal site because fuck those guys. And so that increases your tax even more, right? Because now you have people who will commit their own illegal acts against you because you're so unpopular and they'll come after you and they're not even state sponsored. That's how much it'll force you underground or you just, get busted or whatever. And so I don't agree with him that it's impossible. It's that you have to pay this tax. And like Parler opted to not pay the tax. And then, hey, they face the consequences. And if you go, say, read the Wikipedia article on Gab, that's a better example. Gab has continuously fought that battle and they keep paying the tax. And you can just see from all the hoops they've jumped through, it's very high, but they're willing to keep playing that game. And so as far as I know, Gab's still around.
Yeah, and I feel like what Carl was doing was pointing out how high that barrier is.
It's not as high as he was pretending because he was like, step one, be your own bank. And that was where he had already gone way off the rails. None of these companies have had to be their own bank to make things work. They figured out something. Like Pornhub isn't their own bank. Gab didn't have to be their own bank. Even Silk Road didn't exactly have to be its own bank. It was kind of its own payment processor. nobody has had to step one be their own bank in order to get any of this to happen. And so already his argument was invalid. It was interesting. He raised a lot of points. The real point I wanted to get into is for this speech, one of the problems is there are, in fact, state-sponsored monopolies that cause a problem. And that was the thing I wanted to talk about. We talked about domain names and registering a domain. I guess you could argue you don't need a domain to speak on the internet. You can just be like, here's my IP address, and someone can just type that into a web browser. On the other hand, you can't actually just get an IP address. There's the Internet Names Authority. It's like IANA, who vends out IP addresses. And so I think you can actually get deplatformed because someone takes away your IPs. I've never heard of it happening, but I think that can. But then also you can get deplatformed because someone takes away your DNS entry. And GoDaddy did that to ARFCOM. And GoDaddy's done that to a lot of people. And a bunch of the registrars have done that. And so that's definitely a point of failure. One way you can insulate from that is you can just pick a registrar that doesn't seem to care. There's a fair number of those where they just don't really care about whatever you're saying on your website. And so they won't deplatform you.
Is there another weak link between your browser and the DNSs? I mean, when you type something into your browser and your browser ultimately has to somehow decide what DNS to go to resolve that domain name into an IP address.
Yeah, funny you should ask. So there didn't used to be.
Yeah, because I don't know how that works. So
yeah, there didn't used to be, but there is now. So in a lot of ways, you probably use Chrome. A lot of people use Chrome. Yeah. So Google is middlemaning you a bunch of places there. So Chrome has its safe browsing registry, and it looks at a website's URL, I think, hashes it, and then checks it against a Bloom filter to see if it appears to match. And then if it does, I think it checks with their, like calls the mothership and checks with their database and says, is this an unsafe URL? And so it's fairly privacy preserving. It mostly doesn't look at every URL you browse to, just ones that appear to be, they have like a 1 in a million chance of being safe. And so they're probably unsafe. And then it will tell you, hey, this site is probably trying to defraud you or hack you or cheat you or something. Are you sure you want to continue? And so they could always just list your site on that. And it doesn't exactly block you, but it would really make people scared. Like if they went to parlor.com or whatever, I don't even know if it was .com, but if they went there and it was like, hey, this is a malicious website, that would hurt. Then a lot of people use Google to resolve their DNS. So you can point your DNS at 8.8.8.8 or 8.8.4.4, which are both Google controlled, and a lot of people do that. Or you can point them at Cloudflare DNS. Also, they've asked people to do that. And they are good DNS resolvers, but then presumably they could block you too. If you don't point them at that, you're using your ISP to do DNS resolution. They could block resolution of something. So there's all that coming out of your browser. And there's also a bonus one that came up with Apple and Zoom some time ago. Some people may have seen the security issue with Zoom where it was running a web server it made it where when you clicked on a Zoom link, it would just open Zoom immediately. And so it was pretty convenient. But if you uninstalled Zoom, that web server wouldn't get uninstalled because it just wasn't included in the uninstall script. And so then some researcher pointed that out. Everyone freaked out, even though, what was it? WebEx did that and a couple of other products did that, but nobody noticed them. So Apple included an entry in their malware removal tool that would just go ahead and delete that web server for you, which was the first I ever heard about it. So Apple has this software just running on everything that's running Mac OS that can delete any software that you're running, apparently. And that's just been sitting there. Yeah. So it's like, oh no, we had this slight problem. We think termites are getting in this house. And it's like, okay, I blew it up with my ion cannon. And then nobody ever asks the question of, why did you have an ion cannon in the first place?
Aimed at my house.
Yeah. No, it can hit any house from orbit. Yeah. Just don't ask about it. So Apple has this capability to delete any software off your computer that they want. So that can deplatform you. Like if you say, we're not going to go through a web browser, we're going to build our own Parler browser, or we're going to build, a Parler app that lets you just access it. Well, they could delete you. So have fun with that. Probably Microsoft has the same capability, right? Probably. I wouldn't be surprised if someone's like, actually, they've had it for 25 years, whatever. Would that be reasonable? No, they've had it for like 20 years. Yeah. I think that's entirely possible too. I mean, you run Windows Defender, right, on a Windows PC, that is functionally what that program does, is it deletes apps off of your computer without asking. So, Parler becomes a malicious app, Windows Defender defends you from it, whatever. So I think that's all I can think of for now. On desktop, that can block you. But funny you should ask. Yeah.
Good luck if you want to use a phone at all.
On a phone, it's more direct. They're just like, fuck your app. And they won't put you on the App Store. And they can delete it after the fact too. But I think they mostly don't.
Yeah, so it sounds like quite a mess we're in then.
Well, this is the argument that Richard Stallman made for decades, and everyone was like, that crazy old coot. And then he turned out to be precisely right. And everyone did not want to envision such a future because it was too depressing. And he was very correct. And he's like, you should only run free and open source software. And free as in you're free to modify it afterwards. And open source as in you can inspect the source code. Otherwise, you get into the situation we're in now, where you have a bunch of private companies, and when they run code on your device, and that's the only code that device runs, effectively they're like running a little government on your phone or on your computer, and it does what they want. It doesn't do what you want. You can ask it to do stuff, but also ultimately you're not really the admin of your own machine. You're not admin on your phone. You're admin on Windows. You have, I think, pretty absolute control over Windows, but you're not really on Mac OS. It's very difficult to assert absolute control over Mac OS. And then with Linux, you're admin. So you can do this. You can run Linux on your desktop. You can root your phone, although you have to like jailbreak it, but I believe the DMCA lets you. And then you can run some alternative OS on your phone, which is hard. Also, once in a while, the government is like, maybe we're going to ban you from doing that, which is another thing Richard Stallman predicted. He predicted this would come up through ebooks, and the software wouldn't let anyone who wasn't authorized read your books, and the government would make it illegal to try and like debug that software to get around its controls, which we almost saw with the DMCA. And when that happened, everyone was like, oh my God, Stallman's right. But yeah, increasingly, you don't control your own device. A good example of where this extends to is your car. Your car it has computers in it, and it does all kinds of shit behind your back, and it doesn't ask you. And there's no way to opt out of that. Increasingly, you're going to be unable to buy a car that doesn't do this, and you can't just go run Linux on your car. Yeah. And so everyone's going to be driving around surveillance mobiles. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually hit a point where it just has microphones in the cab that are on all the time, and they just sort of pinky swear not to use the audio, but they're sending it all back.
Well, we've been there for a long time. OnStar with all the GM vehicles have microphones in the cab.
Yeah, but it doesn't send the audio back all the time.
Okay.
I think eventually that will happen. I think it'll send it back all the time. And they'll be like, this lets us listen for traffic accidents and to monitor noise levels in the car to help with anti-noise. And, if you like stop at a drive-through or something, we can do sound improving technology. And eventually they're just going to be like, we just stream audio from your car all the time. Fuck you. You tapped I agree when you turned the car on the first time. So you totally agreed to this.
Yeah, my point is more that like we are closer to crossing that boundary than people might realize.
Yeah. OnStar can already just listen to you whenever.
Yeah. So we've just kind of outlined the problem here. Like barely outlined it and talked about it, but I don't see any solutions. And again, this comes to the problem of having like a libertarian worldview. It's like, I don't think I should find a solution to this. Their company, their rules. And then it's like, okay, I mean, that's a nice philosophy, but you're just going to get like run over.
I think that's fine. And I think the only thing from a libertarian perspective I'd want to get rid of is the state-sponsored monopolies around vending out IP addresses and domain names. And I would want to say anyone should be able to get IPs or domains without force being involved. But for the rest of this, all you have to do is have a web server and attach it to the internet anywhere. So you just need to find anyone who's on the internet who's willing to attach it. And then you're on the internet.
And hope they never sever that attachment from you.
Well, the thing is, what are you going to do anyway? Like if you say, okay, nobody will let me attach it to the internet, how is any other endpoint going to receive your web page? Like if you say every ISP on earth is gonna said no, I won't host you, then isn't every IP on earth ISP going to block clients from trying to connect to your web server.
My point is more that like that's another inconvenient point of failure that you would have to work around when it eventually happens. The same as like GoDaddy dumping you.
Well, and then the other thing I'd want to see, I guess I should add this too from a libertarian perspective. Right now, a lot of ISPs enjoy a state-sponsored monopoly. If you say, fuck Cox Cable or Comcast or any of the few other providers in the US, I'm going to run my own fiber line. You can't. The government won't let you just run your own fiber line. And so that's very much a state-sponsored monopoly. And I feel like if the government's going to give them this protection where I'm not allowed to compete with them and start up, Blake ISP, then they should be forced to act as a common carrier and carry any traffic that I tell them to. And they should not have a choice in the matter, or else they lose their protection. And that's an example where they're sort of violating that libertopia because they're a state-sponsored monopoly. They're using force to prevent competition.
The problem here is that I agree with you, but I fully expect to get thoroughly fucked in the future because of it.
Yeah, maybe. So I thought about this a lot, and I can go ahead and spoil it and say I have not come up with any solutions for it. But one of the things I think is a really big problem here is the fact that there is not, like, all these companies are essentially little governments, right? I mean, I made the joke of we have companies regulating government right now.
Yeah.
But Twitter is a government that can just unilaterally ban people. And so if you say, what kind of government is Twitter right now? Like, how would you describe it?
Unaccountable.
Yeah, okay. So I would say like dictatorship.
I didn't want to say that because I felt like that was too dramatic, but I wanted to underscore the specific point because, like, what are the characteristics of a dictatorship? It's violent, it's arbitrary.
It doesn't have to be violent.
Yeah, it pretty much eventually does. Otherwise, people are like, fuck this. I don't want to live under this dictatorship.
I don't know.
Except
the UK has a queen, like Sweden has a king.
Right, and the Queen's
Thailand has a king.
The Queen of England's only official duty is squeezing the trigger on that gun to open some like shooting match every year. That's the only official duty she has left.
We were watching The Crown recently. The Queen actually has a lot more power than you realize.
Oh, she has to like carry that mace into Parliament or something.
Maybe you should go read the Wikipedia article about her. The Queen can dismiss Parliament or like dissolve Parliament. She can dismiss the Prime Minister. She can appoint a new one. She can make war. She can declare war. She can do a huge number of things and just declines to. She can basically replace the entire government with one of her own choosing, which gives her like de facto still complete monarchy powers, because she can essentially say like, I'm going to dissolve the current UK government and replace it with the Queen's government that answers to me. And then she can do whatever she wants.
So back on the point here that when you take the characteristics of a dictatorship, I think arbitrary was really the one I was going for, because I don't really think like Twitter is violent.
Yeah. Also, Twitter is oddly accountable in that they're this like public corporation. And so like their shareholders can sue them. It's actually kind of weird.
Yeah. I just, as time goes on, I feel like that has less and less teeth, especially as ETFs become a bigger thing that short circuits the shareholder control.
Well, perhaps you've heard the joke of everything is securities fraud. I think you'll hear that joke more and more.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't, but okay.
Oh, you should read Matt Levine. He makes a joke all the time, but then he shows these ever more ridiculous cases where someone sues a company for something being securities fraud, and it gets like stupider and stupider because basically knowing any materially bad news that might affect your company and then not reporting it is something where shareholders can jump on you and be like, this is securities fraud because you knew the stock was going to go down and you didn't tell us. So like, is your CEO sexually harassing someone at the company securities fraud? And it's like, no, of course not, right? It's just a regular old crime. And it's like, but he didn't tell you. And then it's like, well, when was he supposed to disclose this? Like, as he was doing it, like, hey, I'm sexually harassing them right now. And if he waits until afterwards, then if anyone trades on that information in a way that can materially harm the shareholders, you can claim that it was securities fraud afterwards. And you can do this for all manner of bad news. And so it's been taken to a pretty ridiculous extreme. But concretely in this example, I'm sort of surprised it didn't happen, but someone could sue Twitter, and and their stock did go down. If you recall, it went down like 5% or something when they banned Trump. And so you could sue them for securities fraud because they banned Trump. Has nothing to do with securities, but you totally could. It kind of makes them accountable, but in this weird, nonsensical way.
Okay, so back on your point of what type of government this is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say it's like it's a tyranny, right? It's
okay, some general type of it. Okay.
Yeah. And then what's the sort of meta government between the different tech companies? Like, as an example, in the world today, we have a mix of, like...
It's like an oligarchy between these group of powerful people. Is this what you're getting at?
No, I don't think it's really an oligarchy. Like, in the world, we have, republics and monarchies and stuff like that. And then sort of the meta top level government is just anarchy, right? All the countries do what they think they can get away with.
Okay, yeah.
We have the UN and the EU, and they're pretending like they're these higher level meta governments that can do something, but they don't really do that much. And otherwise, the countries just, sometimes they still just invade each other or whatever. And like, you sanction them. Oh, they're so scared. So it's
strongly worded letters.
Yes, mostly just anarchy at the top level. I feel like that's kind of what we have between the tech companies right now. And so there's insufficient competition for government. There's not a very good YouTube alternative. There's not a good Facebook alternative or anything like that. And so they are not under any pressure to migrate their governments upwards from tyranny to some better form of government. And you can sort of view governments as like this technology, like they're going up a tech tree, and like pretending to be a republic, pretending to be a democratic government has a lot of value. And it's way better than an anarchy. It's way better than mob rule, which is slightly more organized. It's more like going towards like the kleptocracy viewpoint, where it's like, hey, let's have one centralized government at least, and that government will be consistent in some way. I guess you could say we have that. Like they're sort of consistent tyrannies, right? Like Jack Dorsey at Twitter makes the decisions. And so that if Jack Dorsey loves you, he probably won't ban you. And if he hates you, your risk of getting banned is a lot higher. So it has that level of consistency, but that's about it. And Facebook is pretending they have their, pretend little Supreme Court, and we'll see how that goes. They've referred a case from themselves to their own little Supreme Court about Trump. And so Trump's going to have his spokesman go to, the Facebook pretend Supreme Court, and we'll see how that goes. And then supposedly they'll make a decision and it's binding. I don't know how. I don't think Facebook set themselves up where it's actually legally binding, but maybe they did. If they really did, then this is the type of thing I really support. I've been arguing that platforms should use courts for a long time.
Facebook has ruled, now let them enforce their decision.
Yeah, but the thing is, the US doesn't necessarily have the best way of deciding stuff, but the court system is okay. It's a lot better than just you ask some guy in the government and he just like says okay, or he smacks you down.
Yeah,
randomly.
it's kind of okay, and the decisions are generally respected.
Yeah, and the really important thing about the court system is there's a public history. And so even if the government is fucking everyone at least knows in which direction they will get fucked in advance. With the argument I was making around the ATF can like arrest someone and claim that they were constructing an illegal machine gun or whatever. But then later you get to look at that case and you're like, well, did they win the case? And if the answer was no, then you can at the very least construct exactly that same machine gun. And that you'll be fine. Because even if they arrest you and haul you into court, you're going to win that case because of stare decisis. You're just going to say, hey, court, look at this decision. And they're going to be like, yeah. And it's not even going to cost very much.
It's funny you claim that, because the ATF has claimed in the past that court cases it loses only applied to that specific plaintiff.
Yeah, how often does that work for them, though? I bet it doesn't work very much. Of course they'd claim that, right? But I bet it doesn't work very much for them.
Of course, it goes back to the other problem you stated, which was you get to be the test, and if you test wrong, then it's 10 years.
Yeah, but still, in general, that works really well in the court system. If you have like an identical case and you can show how it was ruled, then the courts, they don't just look at the previous case and say, yeah, that's a good reference. They actually say, like, from a philosophical standpoint, we should align our ruling with that one. Like,
mm-hmm.
like in general, there's a legal principle that's like, it's better to decide the same way as last time than to think about this again. And they're like, if you want to think about it, go appeal, Supreme Court, and then let the Supreme Court think about it. But they're like, I'm just going to rule the same way that other guy ruled, because they're like, consistency has more value than trying to view every case as one off, which I agree with. And that's really good. And so that takes me to another point I wanted to make about these platforms, which is when someone gets deplatformed, it's in the news. When Trump got banned, it was in the fucking news. When someone gets busted for having 100 pounds of meth in their car and then they go to jail for a while, that's not in the news, because that's what we all expect. The courts are really consistent about that. You have 1 billion pounds of meth in your car? Yeah, you're going to go to jail. I should hope so, right? It's really consistent. You murder someone, you go to jail. Hopefully, especially if they convict you, you go to jail. And it's really consistent. It doesn't make the news where it's like, this guy murdered someone and then he went to prison. Everyone's like, whoa, I kept expecting that would happen, but it never did. But oh my God. But instead, whenever someone gets deplatformed, it's like, hey, you know, PayPal banned this guy, or hey, like Facebook banned Trump. And it's like, whoa, I thought maybe it would happen, but I didn't know. And it's like, what did he do? Or especially Twitter. If you go look at why Twitter banned Trump, it's hilarious. They quote these 2 tweets that he did that are really innocuous. And they're like, that was the last straw. And it's like, man, that looks like nothing. I can't believe you're pretending like that's the reason you banned him. We know why you banned him. The Capitol riot, and you never liked him anyways. That's why. And they're like, yeah, but we're not going to write that in our press release. And it's like, yeah, but we all know that's the reason. And it shouldn't be a surprise. If there was some amount of competition for governments and these companies were forced to create more reasonable governments within themselves, when someone got deplatformed, we would all know it was coming. We'd be like, you were just asking for it. We knew. And then when you finally got deplatformed, it was like, of course you did. Yeah. And I know what post it was for. It was for this post, because these 20 other guys have gotten banned for exactly that string of words that you wrote there. Yeah. That's what should be happening. It should never be a surprise. But there's no competition for government. So you're like, I want to take my business under another government, and there isn't one.
And so instead, we're at the mercy of all these arbitrary decisions, is the point you're making.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons that we got there, and this is the place where it's really hard to get out of it, is, I couldn't think of a better term for it. I call it tyranny of free. But because it effectively costs you nothing to create a Facebook account and like connect with your friends, it costs you something, but it's not very much, right? It's almost free. It doesn't cost you any transaction cost with dollars, but it takes a little effort. So, and then you get access to all these benefits. You're on Facebook. You do whatever people do on Facebook. I don't know. But then if Facebook too shows up, you have to pay this slight cost to get on Facebook too. And then none of your friends are on there. So why should you do it? And if Facebook costs like $1, then someone could show up and create Facebook too and be like, oh, it costs 50 cents. But because it's free from a monetary perspective, you should only get on there like one time. There's not really a benefit to ever join Facebook too, even if it shows up. And it literally did, because we lived through Google Plus, which was Facebook too. And people didn't join it. And there wasn't a lot of incentive to join it. And they would have had to make it like 10 times better than Facebook to get people on there. And they arguably didn't even really make it better than Facebook in the first place. And so it was like, why bother? Google Plus is mostly just full of Google employees all talking to each other in like an echo chamber. So when these sites can be free in quotes and they have some kind of network effect, it prevents competition from ever showing up. And so that's why we're where we are now. If it wasn't for that, then you could have this competition for government. But because they have network effects and they try really hard to cultivate them, that's where I'm sort of not sure how to get out of this local maximum that we're in. And I don't think it's exactly like a libertarian problem. It's more like economics and social factors. I don't know what to do there. And that's where I'm sort of just stymied. And I'm like, because you can create a competing site. You can create a copy of all of these big tech sites. And despite what Carl said, you can copy all of them and you can probably figure out a way to make payments work, and you'll have to pay the tax, but you can do it. But then there won't be anyone there. And so then what do you do?
Is the way out that Twitter and Facebook just make themselves so shitty and arbitrary that enough people look for an alternative, and then one presents itself in the market and the market actually becomes split?
They keep trying, right? They just can't.
You mean to make themselves shittier? Yeah.
But they can't make themselves shitty enough to send people away. The other thing is, we haven't even fully seen like the sinister level of this. Just wait until they start banning people talking about how bad they are for doing this, or not banning, just deleting the posts or refusing to share the post. It's in Facebook's best interest. When you make a post and you're like, Facebook sucks for banning Parler, they'll just be like, oh yeah, that just didn't get shared with anybody on their feed. And
our fact checkers found out it was false.
It's disputed. I mean, we dispute it and we decided to share it 0 times, which is a number. And if you don't like it, you can take your business nowhere. So there you go. And what are you going to do? And I feel like that's coming, if it's not already here.
Yeah, maybe that's the way out. I mean, I pretty much agree with you on everything. I believe Carl was more right than you believe, but
I like how he's posting it in a YouTube video that I was able to watch.
Yeah, eventually you will no longer be able to watch that video on YouTube, though. I mean, we both know that.
I don't think so, though. I think actually that one will always stay up because it basically doesn't talk about guns. YouTube will be like, yeah, we're going to leave this up. Look what a paragon of free speech we are. We just blocked the rest of his channel.
Do you remember he put an AR-15 on the table in front of him while he filmed that video?
That may eventually get blocked. That's true. Because AR-15s are scary.
I believe it was unloaded. There was not even a magazine in it.
Yeah, but they're scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've gotten to the point where with some of those videos, I'm saving them on my computer.
Oh, no.
Because
that is really bad.
I'm just waiting for the day when they get blocked.
Even I'm not that crazy.
Yeah, like Tech Ingredients guy has a good video called Don't Try This at Home. And I think, honestly, that title is the reason it's still up. I recommend everyone go watch it. It's awesome. He goes over how to make a whole bunch of different explosives. That's what it is. He's like, I took this, and I mixed them together. Then he goes and wraps them in tinfoil, and he hits it with a hammer, and it's like, blam! And then he's like, and here's how to make blasting caps. And here's how to make electronically timed fuse. And probably for most of our listeners, and for me, I didn't know how to do any of that. I bet you don't know how to do that stuff. And you especially don't know how to take ammonium nitrate and 3 different ways to sensitize it and then how to set it off. And he goes over all those things. And it's really awesome. I thought it was really interesting to see all this and him talking about like the briscience of different explosives and stuff. But eventually that video is going to get flagged. And then YouTube's going to be like, yeah, I think that's a little too close to advocating for the violent overthrow of the US government or whatever. And they're going to decide to take it down. I saved that video. But I don't think it's going to be up forever. It's really awesome.
Yeah. I felt a little ridiculous like 2 or 3 years ago when we recorded our podcast on hate speech. And I was like, eventually I'm going to hell will get banned from Reddit. And I was like, it feels like it probably will. And then when Reddit did one of their giant purges like 18 months ago, I'm not sure if the original I'm going to hell got banned, but all of like I'm Going to Hell 2 and 3 and, all the other channels of it got banned.
Subreddits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had that one podcast where you went the whole time referring to a subreddit as a channel or something.
Or a forum or something. What the fuck ever.
And I just let it go.
A subreddit is not some special thing.
Use the right words.
It's some made up bullshit. It's just a forum.
Everything is made up bullshit. All words were made up once. You're like, it's just the ones I can't remember. Those are the stupid ones.
There's no value in making up a new one for the same idea. There's not something fundamentally different about a subreddit in the way it works.
What's wrong with jamming 30-round clips into your AR-15? 100-round clipazines that can fire 100 rounds a second. Bump stocks are machine guns. See, words matter. That's another thing, too. I'm really sad to see, because all these tech companies are so left-leaning, they're all like getting really afraid of guns. And then there's all these, I don't know, white supremacist Trump supporter people who are like, let's bring a bunch of unnecessary AR-15s to this protest. And I can tell you, all my liberal friends see that and they just flip out. And they're like, oh my God, they have scary black rifles. And like, from my standpoint, I'm like, that's why you should get a scary black rifle. Like, That's what the Second Amendment is for. What you should do is you should arm yourself. Everyone should be armed. Everyone should be able to resist violent assaults from everyone else. But instead, no, because I don't know, they were taught in university or something. Their go-to is, no, this is why everyone should be disarmed, except for the cops. My dogs have decided to have a dog battle behind me while podcasting, so that's nice. But yeah, like just everyone should be armed. Like they should have the ability to resist someone else's violent use of force. But then people, like liberal people, are like, no, let's just disarm everyone except for the cops and soldiers. Despite the fact that there were like these BLM protests where it was like, the cops suck. They overuse force on black people. And they're like, but we should also take away all private citizens' guns so that only the cops can like do this to us. And it was like, what? And it felt wildly inconsistent. But then, you know, as soon as the like Trump supporters took up arms, they're like, oh yeah, see, this is why guns are scary. And it's like, just everyone should have guns. And especially given the state that the US is in, you could go sort of two directions. You could try to ban all the guns, or you could try and arm everybody so that the good guys are armed.
We're basically almost at that second part already.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the first one is like, how do we remove 1 billion guns from the country?
Yeah, but anyway, not to turn this into the Second Amendment podcast, but the reason this sort of bothers me is because I feel like increasingly as tech companies are deciding they're the arbitrators of what speech should be allowed, one of the types of speech that they don't like is scary firearms speech. And I wish that the firearms community in particular, especially given who it is, would reach out a lot more to liberals and minorities and even people at tech companies and be like, there's actually really good reasons to have a gun. There is a really good reason to carry a pistol, and there's a really good reason to own a rifle in your home. And it's to defend against other people trying to use force on you. And no matter how much you wish you lived in some kind of world where everyone was disarmed, you don't. And you're never going to disarm everyone from having knives. And so the way to stop a violent attacker is to use superior force against them. And a cop can't get there in time. If someone decides to attack you or your family, you have a matter of seconds to deal with it. And unless the cop comes out of your fucking pocket or something, they're not going to be able to help you. And so even if you disarm everybody except the cops, if someone decides to attack you, there's nothing you can do.
I will say that those people doing that outreach do exist in the gun community. I would not speculate on what their prevalence is, but all of those types of outreach do exist.
Yeah. It seems disappointingly little to me. Another good group of people too is women. Women should concealed carry. And boy, would it be great if just a small fraction of them did, because it would discourage a lot of violent attacks against women. And women are largely incapable of winning a fight against a like large violent attacking man, which is common. And if they're carrying a gun, then it's very difficult for a man to win the fight against a woman. And I really wish more people would be like, hey, let's arm all our women. I don't want to see unarmed women getting crimes successfully committed against them just because they were unarmed. Yeah, I wish there was way more outreach. I know so many people who are like, oh, I've never held a gun before, or I've never shot a gun. And it's like, hey, they're really fun.
Yeah.
And they protect you.
I feel like the last, 8 years or so has, like, while that outreach does happen, the average of the gun community has become more politically polarized. And so now the predominant attitude is like, I'm not going to teach a liberal anything about guns.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be armed. I would never help them do that.
And then we're going to quickly be in a world where Facebook, Twitter, YouTube prevent you from talking about guns, like at all, probably. And so then it'll be really hard to do any kind of outreach through those and explain to like those very people, here's why you should have a gun.
Yeah. And then at the same time, the government will just come down on it through ITAR. They've already begun that years ago. They tried saying sharing 3D printed gun part files was an ITAR violation. And eventually they'll say that simply discussing guns on internet forums is a violation of the section of ITAR that talks about you not being allowed to train foreigners.
I don't think they'll be able to win that, though. I think First Amendment will protect it.
I have no faith in the courts on anything.
Well, yes, you do.
It'll be fun.
Why don't you leave the US?
It'll be fun because I know you've always been interested in guns, but like you've become rapidly more interested just recently. And so it's fun like watching you like discover all this gun stuff. For me, who's like a decade ahead in like knowledge and experience with it. And so it's like you're like, no, the court. And it's like, yeah, don't hold your breath.
I don't think you can make that argument though, because it's not like, oh yeah, I remember 10 years ago with 3D printed guns, and it was like what, in 2011 there wasn't really anything. I feel like there are a couple of things like that where people are like, oh yeah, this time it's different, like with Bitcoin, say. And it's like, well, it is. Remember 100 years ago when people were debating about cryptocurrency? Yeah, me neither, because it didn't fucking happen. Like the internet is different now. And so like when it comes to 3D printing a gun, it's like, yeah, remember 100 years ago when they were dealing with 3D printed guns? Oh, that's right. It didn't happen. And so it is new and novel. And so, yeah, I guess you don't have to have faith in the courts, but also like sometimes the courts randomly decide in your favor. So I wouldn't just assume that they won't hear. Like, yeah, parts of the government will come after it through ITAR or whatever. We'll see. But actually, I can think of a good example of this where, haha, I have a lot more experience than you, and it's with cryptography. Mm-hmm. And the government was trying to regulate cryptography as munitions, and people were like, this is bullshit, you're bullshit. And they were like, they did things like they printed a book, and the book was nothing but easily scanned code. And it was like an implementation of PGP or whatever. So the government eventually gave up. They were like, there's no way that we can stop crypto from getting exported. And so they were just like, fine, whatever. They tried to regulate it for a while. They limited export encryption to 40 bits. And so if you used Internet Explorer a long time ago, you could go to the About tab and it would talk about how like either it had 56-bit encryption, which is still laughable for the US, or it would be 40-bit because it was an international version. And the NSA was like, yeah, we can break 40-bit fast enough. But now everyone has access to strong encryption. And so the government just comes at it some other way.
The reason I don't have faith in this when it comes to gun rights is that in the last decade, the courts have taken a stance of openly defying the Supreme Court on gun issues. And then the Supreme Court has declined almost all gun cases for the last decade. And then the courts have taken an attitude that if a ruling will simply make people feel better or feel safer, not will it make them safer, but will it make them feel safer related to guns, then we will make that ruling. And I'm not going to say that happens in every gun case. Yes, the courts do get it right sometimes, but it's the majority. They've been going that way. And they have openly defied the Supreme Court for a decade now. So, there's maybe we'll get some cases here in the next, year or two. I guess the Supreme Court is almost favorable for gun rights right now. I still don't really think it is, but it's almost. Like, we could get lucky if we bring just the right milquetoast kind of gun rights case. Maybe we could get enough support to pass it and expand gun rights.
Yeah, maybe so. It'll also be hard to stop. Like, how do you stop 3D printing files? The government already went through this with crypto when the internet had way less penetration and it had way fewer avenues to try and guard. And there was no way to stop strong crypto stuff from getting out. The main way to do it was to cast doubt that the crypto wasn't backdoored by the NSA already, which that worked pretty well. But you can't backdoor a 3D print file because you can just inspect it and be like, yeah, this looks fine. So you can't have the NSA secretly making everyone's like 3D printed Glock frame break the first time you use it, because they'll use it once and be like, oh, it broke. Like,
yeah, yeah. You just check the correct file and you're like, okay, it's the one that this guy I trust says is good.
But if everyone's like, join my mailing list and I'll send you encrypted zip files of firearms, like, what are you gonna do? You can't stop that. There's no way. And that's easy. That's actually technology that existed a long time ago. And thanks to strong crypto, which enables it. But you're just like, yeah, we're just going to we're going to have encrypted chats. I don't know, use Signal, use Telegram, whatever. And then we're going to send encrypted zip files of firearms. Fine. Like, how are you going to stop that? In fact, this is a good example of what I was talking about. Carl's like, oh, you want your speech to get out? Well, first you have to be your own bank. And it's like, really? Is that going to stop 3D printed Glock frame designs from getting out? I don't think so. I don't think anyone's going to have to be their own bank. And I think you're always going to be able to find a 3D print Glock frame online. You're probably not even gonna have to look that hard. And they won't be their own bank, the bank of 3D printing, operating in defiance of US regulations. Just like how you can get those shitty like anarchist cookbooks for kids or whatever. Those text files are still floating around. They're like, oh, you can take a bunch of bleach and make plastic explosive. And it's like, no. Also, you can just go watch this guy's YouTube video and he tells you how to make real explosives.
I remember downloading that shit in high school and thinking it was like, oh man, what am I getting into here? Oh boy.
With match heads. Now you've wasted a bunch of time and all your good matches.
I remember that one.
Styrofoam and gasoline makes napalm. It's like, or just use gasoline. It's fine. It burns. Yeah, it was fun. I'm trying to think of other ones, but those were pretty good. And it's like, now you can just buy guns. Just do that. You could buy guns and tannerite. You could become an FFL and you can have a rocket launcher with rockets. All your rockets will have little serial numbers written on them, but they'll still be rockets.
Yeah. Like I said, if you're wealthy enough in the United States, gun laws don't apply to you. I mean, most laws don't apply to you, but like gun laws specifically, you can just own whatever you want if you're just wealthy enough.
Yeah.
It's not like other types of like corruption in the United States where it's like, I'm super wealthy, so, you know, I can like let a lady drown in my car while I go call my lawyer, you know? Instead, it's like, I can actually legally own a fucking grenade launching machine gun. It's that kind of legality that's not corruption based.
Yeah, but also if you're the government, the laws don't apply to you. The government owns most of the grenade launchers in the country.
Yeah.
So there's that. They own all of the nuclear bombs in the country.
Well, they just excluded themselves in the laws. They were like, it's okay for us to do it. There's actually like a really interesting lawsuit someone brought against the National Firearms Act several years ago. And it was attacking the system of dealer samples. And a dealer sample is a machine gun that's legal for certain types of federally licensed firearms dealers to own, but is not legal for an individual to own. And so if you own one as a dealer and you decide to forfeit your license, you have to sell the machine gun or destroy it. But the entire like basis for dealer samples is just cut from whole cloth by the ATF. It's not based in law at all. And so the person bringing this lawsuit was like, basically, this shouldn't be allowed at all. And the government was like, but if we didn't have that, then government agencies would have no way to purchase machine guns. And it was like, yeah, you wouldn't. And the law is written in a way where you actually can't. But the ATF just kind of made up this whole system for them to be able to do it. And of course, the courts were like, yeah, how else would the government get machine guns if we followed the law? And so they were like, we'll let it stand.
That's too bad. But also, really, that's just asking them to write, like, they'll just take the ATF regulation and be like, copy, paste, now it's a law. That's all you're hoping for there.
That's a little harder.
No, it's not. Like, they'll literally write a law that says, this law takes this ATF statute, and they'll refer to it by, like, its number code, and makes it law.
Yeah, but I mean,
they don't even have to copy and paste. Difficult. They'll just make a pointer that points to it, and they'll just be like, that's now a law. And you'll be like, great, I win.
At least they have to go to the process then. At least you have to have a law that says, here's the rules we're going to live by.
I agree, but it's such a tiny victory anyways.
It seems weird that we take the particular stance on this issue that we're taking, but like the other issues of this podcast, we had other stances. It seems like you should be arguing my point and I should be arguing your point on this issue.
I agree with you. But also the thing is, this isn't like a libertopia issue. I'm just like, the ATF shouldn't exist and shouldn't regulate this at all. Right. Like,
yeah.
But then it's like, given our current legal framework, they declined to just take a regulation and turn it into a law. And it's like, okay. And like, yeah, the court decision on that was shitty. Fine. I wish it had gone a different way, but that also doesn't seem like a really big issue. So I don't know. It's just hard for me to get super worked up about that, given the state that things are in. It's just like, well, everyone should just be allowed to own machine guns, right? But then if you're in that situation, then like the government can very easily buy machine guns. They'd be able to buy them from me.
Yeah.
out of my car or whatever. I'd be like, yeah, I got crates of machine guns for you here. And they'd be like, okay, we'll take 200. And I'd be like, good, because I got 200 machine guns as a private citizen. I was going to give them to my kids. I was going to give them to this classroom full of kindergartners, but I decided to sell them to you, the army. Also, do you want some grenade launchers? That's what it should be, but it's not.
That really is the shame of the way our gun laws work. Because I would love to go out to my buddy's ranch with like a crate full of grenades and just spend the day throwing grenades at the berm. Or, the U.S. government.
I would like there to be regulation on making the grenades safe to use. So like they don't blow up until I take out the pin and throw them and the spoon flies off. I would be okay with the equivalent of an FDA that made my weapons safe, I think, even though it's not exactly Libertopia, but like I would like the grenades to be safe, because you can imagine you go out to the range and like 1% of the time your car explodes and you die. Like that would be not.
It's like the space shuttle.
Same odds.
When the government buys law rockets for the military and they buy them in bulk, they get them for about $700 each. So that's kind of the price point where it's like, I'd probably buy like one or two and then like find something cool to shoot it at.
What's really sad is the real justification for shooting a law rocket at something is to make a YouTube video with it.
Mm-hmm.
And YouTube is like, eventually they're going to ban almost all firearms videos. I bet. We'll see. Mm-hmm. I think right now they require you to do it like at a range and using safe practices and stuff, but we'll see how long that lasts. But if you shoot a law rocket at something, maybe basically once you're at a certain level of wealth, yeah, you can get $700 of enjoyment out of it. But if you can share it with 1 million other people, it's really easy to get $700 of enjoyment out of it. Yeah, like Mythbusters was a great example of that. They had those episodes where they blew something up for usually a stupid reason, but because everyone could watch them blow something up, it was totally worth doing. Like, yeah, what could you shoot a law rocket at? A frozen lake from a helicopter? That'd be pretty good.
Maybe. I don't know.
A bunch of old cars. Bank vault. An old tank.
I also feel like stuff like a 2 3/4 inch hydro rocket would be cool. You'd have to build some kind of stand and like set up a way to get it to launch, but that'd be another fun weapon.
You just can't put a warhead on it.
Yeah, and a hydro rocket and the quantities that the government buys them, they cost about $30,000.
Too rich for your blood?
Right now. Maybe Bitcoin will go on a tear again.
It's 1 Bitcoin. Yeah, I was watching a video where a guy made a rocket that was going to carry an explosive payload, and he's an FFL and explosives license guy. And so he put serial numbers on both the rocket motor and the warhead, because he's like, it's like 2-stage, like the rocket fires up and then the warhead detaches, so you can hopefully reuse the rocket. And he's like, so I wasn't sure if the ATF would consider like at the moment it detached, is that actually 2 destructive devices? Because I think the rocket motor is a destructive device if used to propel a warhead. And so he's like, but all the fuel's burned out of it at the moment it detaches. But I think he was like, but I don't know. So just to be on the safe side. And so he had this rocket that had a little serial number written on it. And he had this little warhead that had a little serial number written on it. And he's like, there we go. Like, ATF, stay off my back.
Now it's safe.
Yeah. Who is protected by this? But whatever. Well, I think we pretty well resolved the question of deplatforming. And now everyone can just take our answers and go implement them.
I don't feel like we've resolved anything.
I don't think we're going to.
I do think everyone should download this episode of the podcast before it's banned.
Before we get deplatformed. I don't think there's a solution to this. It doesn't feel like something that has one. After all this time, it's been over 2 hours. We haven't even defined what the problem is.
Hopefully we've been entertaining though.
Yeah, hopefully.